contacted you about this book that is a best-selling book, Trumped. And I also want to throw in there, since he's been elected president, have you or anybody that you trust been invited to a meeting, which might make you a little more optimistic about his term?
Well, I think that's a good question. I did send him a draft or one of his people very close to him before the election. Apparently, they didn't like everything they read because it wasn't a testimonial by any means. I kind of identified him as a historic disruptor that did have a chance to change the course of history because we were going in a very bad direction. When I put the book out in August, I think the odds were 90 to 10 that he had any kind of chance whatsoever. But lo and behold, everything that was unexpected is materialized, including this kind of crazy post-election Trumpflation rally, whatever you want to call it. But they didn't actually respond, even though I tried to lay out in the book why he was on the right track, why the Washington Wall Street ruling elites had failed, why our economy was in deep trouble, why bubble finance was basically of interest to the bicoastal elites. And frankly, if you look at the popular vote map even, to say nothing of the electoral votes by county, you can basically see that Hillary Clinton carried the coasts and Trump carried flyover America in between, something like 85% of the counties. So here we are, at an inflection point in history. We've had an election that was totally unpredicted. We have a president-elect who is, unlike any other candidate we've had in modern times in terms of his unpredictability and his unwillingness to kowtow to establishment norms and policies that have been going in the wrong direction for years. So I think it's very hard to predict where we're going, except I think this bubble is going to collapse because the stock market is now nearing 20,000 and, almost 2,300 on the S&P 500. It's at ludicrous extremes. There is no basis for this. I call it, the last call to the sheep by Wall Street for the final slaughter. It's all based on, a theme that was practically cooked up in the middle of the night on November 9th when Trump unexpectedly won, which said there's this great Trump reflation trade coming down the pike. The economy is going to be jolted in 2017 by this huge Trump stimulus from sweeping tax cuts and a big infrastructure, $1 trillion program and all the rest. This is basically nonsense. There isn't a chance that anything remotely close to what is being peddled is going to happen. I've been saying in my daily blog that we're going to have not a Trump stimulus, but a Trump bloodbath, a fiscal bloodbath in the spring and summer of 2017, given how rapid deterioration is going on in both the budget and fiscal accounts, as well as what I think is a very rapidly weakening economy. So there's going to be a lot of fireworks ahead, but I don't think it has anything to do with a bunch of robo-machines probably tomorrow tagging 20,000 on the Dow. They'll tag the chart point, and then I think from that point on, it will be look out below.
Do you think the very act of Trump not going with the flow, going against the grain, maybe making a genuine attempt to fix it, whether his policies are right or wrong, I think he's going to definitely not be George Bush or Obama or any president we've had for a long time. Do you think him just trying to the very act of trying to fix something could blow the whole system up because it's essentially now tethered together with fraud and suppression and manipulation?
Yes, I think that's exactly my point. I commend him for winning the election. Frankly, I voted for him. I didn't hesitate about that. But I do not think he is going to solve the problem, which is monumental and has been building for decades. But he's at least going to disrupt the process. He's going to shatter the status quo illusions and stories and myths that what I call Imperial Washington operates on day in and day out, such as the independence of the Fed, such as we only recovered from the Great Recession because they pulled out all the stops and took the balance sheet from 900 billion to 4.5 trillion in a matter of 36 or 40 months. Such as that we're the indispensable nation going around the world doing the best we can to stabilize regions and further the cause of peace and all that. This is all baloney. The warfare state, as I can call it, is out of control. We're a menace in the world. We're not the indispensable nation. And at least, I don't know where Trump's going with all these generals. It's not overly encouraging, but at least he's got the common sense to say that I'm going to try to see if I can negotiate and come to some modus operandi with Putin rather than start a second Cold War. I mean, the whole idea that we should be frightened of Russia or that somehow that they have nefariously hacked into our political process with, terrible intentions, I think is nonsense. As I often say, I can see Russia from my 18th floor apartment in New York City, but I'm talking not about the Siberian landmass that Sarah Palin thought she saw from her porch in Alaska, but a GDP of Metro New York, which is 1.6 trillion, which is well larger than the whole GDP of the entire Russian economy, which is 1.3 trillion. In other words, they're 7% our size. We spend in 40 days their entire military budget for the year. The idea that they're any kind of threat to the United States, to our security or safety, is nonsense. And frankly, the whole thing in Ukraine was stirred up by us and not by some aggressive intention that was long festering in Moscow. So that's one point. The Fed is another one. And unfortunately, if you want to drain the swamp, you have to start in the Eccles building. That's the epicenter of the swamp. That massive intrusion in financial markets, falsification of money market rates and debt, the yield curve and debt rates, and constant efforts to prop up and support the stock market, all of that is wrecking the U.S. economy because it's turning the C-suites of corporate America into stock trading rooms. The only thing they're focused on is financial engineering, trillions of stock buybacks, trillions of unproductive M&A deals that sooner or later result in losses and waste and unmanageability. So the reason that we're not growing, the reason that we still have fewer true breadwinner jobs today, as I document constantly in my blog, than we had 16 years ago in the year 2000, is essentially because corporate America is cycling trillions of dollars back into Wall Street through these financial engineering gambits. That is inflating to an enormous extent the price of everything that trades, stocks, bonds, derivatives, and so forth, but it is starving American business of real productive investment in plant equipment, technology, and so forth that can support growth in the future. So those are that's kind of a listing of the problem that Trump is addressing. I don't think he has any comprehensive or even coherent plans to deal with any of it. But at least, his motto is, I want to drain the swamp. At least he is skeptical about all the received establishment wisdom. At least at one point or another, he said, we're in a big, fat, ugly bubble. This can't go on. Zero interest rates for 96 months is, kind of economic lunacy. He's addressed all of the symptoms, but I think that will lead, and that's my whole investment strategy and what I do, it will lead to chaos, not recovery. It will lead to, as I say, a fiscal bloodbath, not stimulus. We're going to be in the $1 trillion annual deficit levels very soon. We have a debt ceiling that's going to expire at $20 trillion on March 15th, and before they even get out the gate of their 100 days, they're going to be wrestling with that monster. Already, the Republicans on Capitol Hill are telling you, oh yeah, we're going to have tax cuts, but it's reform. It'll be revenue neutral. We're not going to add to the deficit. Well, all of these fast money traders and boys and girls and robo machines on Wall Street think tax cuts mean huge deficits. They think this is Ronald Reagan Redux 1981. Not going to happen. If we even get a tax bill by mid-2018, I didn't say 2017, 2018, I think we'll be lucky. There is not going to be anything that looks like the infrastructure borrow and spend bonanza that these Keynesian economists and strategists on Wall Street see. None of that's going to happen, and it'll be evident fairly soon that we've been in some kind of post-election honeymoon bubble that that doesn't have any real chance of materializing. Once that becomes clear, once the Fed starts down the path of raising rates, I think this time for good, and giving signals this week that more are coming next year, I think the party's over. And this is a totally artificial market. I think there's going to be a huge correction, maybe in several waves, not all at once. But that will be the story for the next year. And the fundamental lesson is get out of harm's way. The casino's dangerous. Everything is massively overvalued. The stock market at 25 times actual GAAP earnings this late in the cycle with all the headwinds that exist around the world is completely nuts. But that's where we are today. And in a way, it's a gift. The machines ran up the stock averages for the last 23 days. It's a perfect chance for anybody who's long to get out at a high price, and you'll be thankful down the road for what you did.
David, I saw Kanye West had 15 minutes with Donald Trump this morning. If you had 15 minutes, and of course our show is not even have 15 minutes left, so we'll have to keep it briefer than that. What is the one thing you would stress to Mr. Trump that he could do that would help?
The first thing he needs to do is demand that Yellen and Fisher have their resignations on his desk January 20. If he did that, he would say that would be a message powerful and impactful that the bubble finance game is over, that there's going to be a house cleaning at the Eccles building, that there is going to be no cowardly equivocators at the Fed who will try to keep the bubbles going. That will cause a sell-off of monumental proportions in the market, but that's exactly what he should encourage. I've written a couple of things to this effect, and I said, please, President-elect Trump, take a page from Ronald Reagan's playbook. And what he did was lance the boil in 1981. He didn't say, give me 2 years and, get this thing going and get my tax cuts in place, and then maybe we'll try to deal with double-digit inflation. No, he told Volcker, get the job done, get it done now, get it out of the way. So once the debris finally falls and we go through this correction, we can start out in a positive direction with a clean sheet. That's exactly what Trump should do now. It's more important than anything else. It doesn't matter what he's talking about for tax reform. The Fed is 10 times more negative in terms of what it's doing to investment and real productivity and corporate growth in the United States than the tax system today. Sure, taxes ought to be cut. Lower rates, a broader base is an excellent idea. But that's the first thing he ought to do, clean house at the Eccles building. The second thing he ought to do is say, we are not going to keep running the national debt at $20 trillion and adding $1 trillion a year as we move into the 2020s when half of the baby boom, or all of the baby boom will be in retirement. It doesn't work. We have a fiscal crisis. He needs to lay down the law and start a serious process of spending cuts, including, welching a bit on his promises that he won't touch Social Security. Maybe for 40 of the 60 million people who get it, he shouldn't touch it. But for the wealthiest 10% or so, they don't need it. And if anybody could ask them, to give up their benefits, it would be someone like Trump, who they all believe in.
Sure.
It would be like going to China with Nixon. So I would say those are the two big things: clean house at the Eccles building, take on the national debt monster with malice aforethought, and all the other things, including deregulation, which is obviously the route we have to go, freezing all of Obama's regulations, repealing Obamacare. All of this is positive and necessary. But if you don't deal with the Fed and you don't deal with the debt monster and you don't begin to rapidly unwind our interventions everywhere around the world, nothing positive is going to happen.
So for an individual, you look at this, whether Trump tries to fix it, there could be chaos. I mean, if interest rates go up, mortgages could affect real estate, everything. If he doesn't do anything, it's going to blow up anyway. What should an individual be doing right now? Because you just talked about selling stocks. Okay, now you have stocks, and I think it always baffles people, who are looking at this and say, okay, you're saying sell stocks. There's a major debt crisis, but then own dollars for a deflationary protection for your purchasing power. What are your thoughts on that? Should people just go to a cash position, physical cash in a bank, cash in whole life, cash value? Should it be gold and silver? What are the places that people should be starting to diversify into as they get out of the stock market?
Okay, great question. Get out of stocks, get out of bonds, get into cash. Cash is going to be king. It'll be a valuable holding as we go into the future and we finally get a big reset, downward correction of all this. If you have cash, you can buy the stock market at $1,500 or even $1,200 a year or two down the road. That's a heck of a lot better than buying it in the S&P at 2270 or wherever it was today. Secondly, I think the central banking system of the world is in great trouble. They have taken this to lunatic lengths all over the world with zero interest rates and massive quantitative easing, which is just another form of financial fraud, actually. And so, but they're at the end of their rope. There is no right out or left. Every central bank's in trouble. The Fed is, the ECB. The Bank of Japan is lost. China's struggling to stop massive, capital outflows because of the breakdown of confidence there and too much debt. So in that environment, at some point, I think gold is going to soar. As I have said many times, 95% of the time you own gold, you're going to be either sitting, flat or actually suffering, a downturn for a limited period of time. But 5% of the time, when there's a real collapse of confidence, and it happens every 7 or 8 years, gold will soar. So that's the investment of choice. I think in a world where the central banking regime is falling apart and markets are radically correcting downward as this bubble collapses. If people are aggressive and they have discretionary money, this would be a great time to short the market. Either some crazy bubble stocks, take some, pick anyone you want. They're all out there, the banks, Tesla, all of them. Some of these are good companies, but they're dramatically overvalued. Or if you don't have time for that, just short the S&P 500 with one of the ETFs. Or today, I think the greatest opportunity of all is to short the Russell 2000. It's gone berserk in this so-called Trump inflation rally. It is trading now at about twice the multiple in terms of cash to total enterprise value of any time in history. And there is no place for the Russell 2000 sitting up where it is today to go except down. So those would be some ideas. Cash, short the market on a discretionary basis with either ETFs or puts, so that you have risk control on how much is being risked, and put some of it into gold and stand back, because there's going to be carnage all over the place.
Last question, David. When you look at the picks that Trump has for his cabinet, and you look at the people that have surrounded him both before and after the election, I really want to know this, because I think our readers, it could either be something that would yield optimism, or perhaps there's no hope. Have you seen anyone that surrounds Trump that gets it?
Yeah, I think there's the good, the bad, and the indifferent. He's made a lot of bad choices. I think he's got too many generals, too many graduates of the war party and the war machine for the last 30 years. They're not going to do anything different. They're going to tell him they can do it better, and I think that would be a mistake. I'm talking about General Flynn at the National Security Council, Mad Dog Mattis, the Congressman Pompeo at CEO, I think Kelly at Homeland Security. I think those are all mistakes. All these people are spenders. They're going to, tie him in knots, trying to get more money for everything from Homeland Security to the surveillance and spy apparatus to all of the armed forces. Can't afford it, don't need it. It's bad news. There are some good appointments. I like Scott Pruitt, the Attorney General from Oklahoma, who, has been fighting Obamacare, who's been fighting this whole global warming hoax, who understands that this is, there is such a thing as federalism, and Washington can't run the whole country. So I like him. I think Tom Price at HSS, who's got a really solid critique of Obamacare and what you might do to dismantle it and replace it, is a good appointment. I kind of like the guy, Puzder, who was put in at Secretary of Labor. He's a real capitalist entrepreneur. He's got enough nerve to say that the minimum wage destroys jobs, which is exactly the case. So he's good. Then there's a lot of indifferent ones, I guess I would say. Secretary of Transportation is a 25-year Washington hand. She's competent, but I don't know whose agenda she's going to be working. And then there's some fun picks. The one that I'll finish with that I love is Rick Perry, governor of Texas, is going to head the energy department. Everyone remembers the famous debate where there were three agencies he was going to cancel. Couldn't remember the third one, which was the energy department. So now he has his chance. And to me, it's a little nostalgic, because when I became budget director in 1981, at the top of my list of agencies to eliminate was the Department of Energy. It's still there. In the interim, it's wasted probably $100 billion. Maybe Rick Perry will make some headway, at least slamming the thing down. So in net, the strongest member of the Trump cabinet is Trump. The guy who's got the most, the most open-minded view of what needs to be done on these big questions of war and money and, debt, is Trump. Hopefully, as his team comes together, some of the tendencies that I'm very worried about, two crony capitalists, Steve Munch in the Treasury, horrible pick. And, Wilbur Ross at Commerce, I don't see what he brings to the table either. But it's going to be immeasurably better than what would have happened if the incumbent establishment government in waiting of Hillary Clinton would have won the election.
Certainly going to be a very interesting 4 years. Everyone, make sure you go to David Stockman's Contra Corner. Also, buy the book Trump today. And I also want to recommend The Great Deformation. These are two great books. You can read them over the holidays.